Widow's Bay officially just became one of the most dangerous mystery horror shows on television, because episodes 6 and 7 completely changed everything we thought we knew about the island. And trust me, this wasn't just another creepy backstory episode. This was the moment the show finally revealed the true horror behind the Warren family, the plague, the sacrifices, and the evil hiding beneath the island itself. So tonight, grab your lanterns, lock your doors, and step carefully into the fog, because we're traveling all the way back to the year 1702. Full spoilers ahead. September 16, 1702. A woman named Sarah Wescott arrives at Widow's Bay by boat, preparing to marry the island's founder, Richard Warren. At first, Sarah believes this marriage could finally give her a new beginning. A loving husband, a family, a peaceful future. But the second she steps onto the island, you can already feel something is wrong. The town looks sick, empty, rotting, and outside one of the homes, she notices a giant X painted onto the door. A warning sign. The plague has already begun spreading across the island. Now remember, Sarah knows nothing about the horrors waiting for her here. She's told Richard Warren is a respected leader, a savior, the man who transformed Widow's Bay into a thriving settlement. But the deeper she walks into town, the more unsettling everything becomes. We also learn Sarah was considered a spinster at the time, meaning society viewed her as an older unmarried woman with little future left. Which explains why this marriage moved so quickly. Richard needed a wife, Sarah needed a new life, and Widow's Bay became the perfect trap. That's when Pastor Collins enters the story. And immediately, something feels off about him too. He tells Sarah that if she ever feels lonely or afraid, she can always come to him. At first it sounds comforting, but later, you realize this conversation meant way more than it seemed. Because the entire island already knows Richard Warren is hiding something terrifying. Now it's finally time for the wedding, and we officially meet Richard Warren. And man, the second this guy appears on screen, the atmosphere changes completely. He doesn't feel human. He feels like someone carrying an ancient darkness inside him. Even during the vows, Richard adds strange conditions to the marriage. Not just loyalty to him, but loyalty to the island itself. And that line right there, super important, because this isn't a normal marriage. Sarah isn't marrying a man. She's marrying herself into a curse. After the ceremony, Sarah meets Richard's 5 children. And for a brief moment, the episode almost tricks you into thinking things might become normal. But then the church bells ring, and Richard immediately leaves, because deep down, the island always comes first. That night, Sarah hears noises downstairs, and this is where the episode becomes straight up nightmare fuel. She finds Richard sitting alone in darkness, his eyes rolled back, his hand bleeding, while holding the mysterious cylinder necklace, the same object connected to the island's curse. And Richard looks almost possessed, like he's communicating with something unseen, something ancient, something hungry. And honestly, I think this was the moment the island was demanding another sacrifice. The next morning, Sarah watches Richard quietly dragging away a dead body. And that's when she meets Abigail, the physician's wife. Now this conversation feels small at first, but it's actually terrifying. Because Abigail casually explains how the plague destroys people's minds before killing them. Victims become violent, paranoid, unstable. One man even murdered his own wife before dying himself. And, suddenly, the island feels less like a town, and more like a prison slowly collapsing into madness. Later that night, while Sarah cleans dishes, she overhears Richard speaking with a local man named Ezra. And this is where everything starts exploding. Ezra reveals 3 more people have fallen sick, bringing the death count even higher. But then, he says something even more disturbing. People believe Richard is communicating with the island itself, that the necklace he carries isn't religious at all, but connected to something dark, something evil. And the second Ezra says that, Richard completely snaps. The argument turns violent instantly. Sarah secretly watches from the staircase, as Richard beats Ezra to death with his own cane. And man, this scene was brutal, because in that exact moment, Sarah realizes she didn't marry a protector. She married a monster. The next morning, while cleaning the dining room, Sarah discovers a loose floorboard, hidden underneath, a secret chamber, and inside, Ezra's bloody cane. that was the final confirmation. No more denial. No more excuses. Richard Warren is hiding murders inside his own house. Terrified and completely alone, Sarah remembers Pastor Collins telling her she could come to him for help. So she rushes to the church and finally tells him everything. The murders, the hidden chamber, the disappearances. And this is where Pastor Collins reveals the horrifying truth. People have been vanishing from the island for years, including Richard's first wife. Collins believes Richard has been chosen by evil itself, maybe even the devil. Now obviously Sarah wants to escape immediately, but Collins stops her, because according to him, Sarah was brought to Widow's Bay for a reason. To end this nightmare. The plan: leave the front door unlocked at night, and they'll assassinate Richard while he sleeps. At dinner later that evening, the tension is insane. Sarah can barely even look at Richard, knowing what's about to happen. But Richard already senses something is wrong, especially after Sarah brings up the rumors surrounding the disappearances. Still, once the children go upstairs, Sarah secretly unlocks the door. That night, an assassin sneaks into the bedroom and violently stabs Richard over and over again. And for a second, you really think it's over. Until suddenly, a body gets thrown down the staircase. But it's not Richard, it's the assassin. And then Richard slowly walks down the stairs, covered in blood, after surviving multiple stab wounds like it was nothing. This man literally feels immortal. And honestly, that reveal was one of the creepiest moments in the entire series. Because now Sarah understands something horrifying. Richard Warren cannot die. The next day, Sarah becomes a prisoner inside the house. The windows are boarded shut, the doors chained, but she remembers the hidden chamber beneath the floorboards. So she returns underground and discovers tunnels running beneath the entire house. She follows a trail of blood until she reaches a horrifying room. Blood everywhere, a single chair, massive locked doors. And if you noticed, this is the exact same room teased back in episode 1. Meaning Richard has been performing ritual sacrifices down here for years. But the biggest mystery still remains. What exactly is behind those doors? A monster? A demon? The island itself? Because whatever Richard has been feeding, it's clearly still alive. Sarah eventually escapes through an underground well tunnel, which connects directly back to the church. And this is where the episode starts tying everything together. Because remember earlier in the season, Reverend Bryce heard strange noises coming from the well. Yeah, now we finally know why. Sarah returns to Pastor Collins completely terrified, telling everyone that Richard survived the assassination. And at this point, she no longer believes he's simply working for evil. She believes Richard is evil. Still, Collins refuses to give up. He tells Sarah a boat will secretly arrive later that night to help her escape the island. But first, they need her help one final time. She's given a liquid poison to pour into Richard's drink. If they can make him sleep, they might finally stop him. Now back at the Warren house, Sarah writes what she believes will be her final journal entry. And this moment hits even harder knowing those journal pages are the exact ones Jerry later translates in the present timeline. Richard suddenly appears behind her, takes the journal, and starts reading it. And the tension here is absolutely insane. Because Sarah knows if he discovers the truth, she's dead. That night, the final plan begins. Sarah secretly pours the poison into Richard's brandy. But Richard refuses to drink it. He says he needs a clear mind. And instantly, the entire plan almost collapses. So Sarah improvises. She seduces him, pulls him closer, starts kissing him, and finally gets him to drink. But Richard quickly realizes something is wrong. And when he forces Sarah to drink from the same cup, she spits it out. Big mistake. Richard immediately attacks her, grabbing her throat, calling her a traitor. And honestly, this scene was terrifying because Richard finally drops all humanity completely. But right before he kills Sarah, his oldest son attacks him from behind and knocks him unconscious. And this detail is huge, because the son reveals he never forgave Richard for murdering his mother. Meaning Richard's own children feared him all along. Sarah and the kids immediately flee toward the docks, hoping to escape the island forever. But once they arrive, the rescue boat is already gone. So instead, they steal a smaller boat to chase after it. And right before they leave, Abigail suddenly appears covered in blood, clearly infected by the plague. and judging by the blood, it looks like she murdered her own husband. She attacks Sarah in full madness mode, but Sarah knocks her unconscious before finally escaping with the children. Meanwhile, Richard wakes up tied inside a coffin surrounded by Pastor Collins and the townspeople. And this scene finally reveals the truth about the island. Collins removes Richard's mysterious cylinder necklace, but Richard begs him not to open it, because according to Richard, that object is the only reason the island survived. Then we finally learn what happened years ago. During the island's first brutal winter, people were starving, some even ate corpses just to survive. Desperate and near death, Richard consumed strange mushrooms that gave him true sight. And after that, something answered him. Maybe the island, maybe a demon, maybe something older than both. Richard made a pact with it. A life, for a life. In exchange for sacrifice, the island would protect its people. And suddenly everything makes sense. The disappearances, the murders, the plague, the sacrifices underground. Richard wasn't killing for pleasure. He was feeding the island. Now obviously the townspeople think he's insane, so they bury him alive inside the coffin. And this final sequence is horrifying, because Richard starts screaming in pure panic. Not for himself, but for his children. He warns everyone that nobody born on the island can ever leave. If they do, the island will kill them, which means Sarah unknowingly doomed the children the second she took them away. And despite Richard begging them to stop, the coffin is sealed shut, and slowly, his screams disappear underground. Then we jump back to the present timeline. Wick digs up Richard Warren's coffin, leading directly into episode 7. Now episode 7 instantly changes the tone, because instead of a historical horror story, it becomes a full supernatural mystery thriller. Tom wakes up after apparently blacking out for an entire day. And honestly, Evan not checking on his father for 24 hours is actually insane. But before Tom can process anything, Wick and Patricia reveal they dug up Richard Warren's coffin. And somehow, Richard is still alive after being buried for over 300 years. Now visually, Richard looks horrifying here. His skin is rotting, his movements are stiff, he literally looks like a walking corpse. But the craziest part, he can still talk, and his voice sounds deep and unnatural, like death itself is speaking through him. Richard finally explains the truth behind the cylinder necklace. Inside was part of the pact itself. He explains how the entity senses desperation in mankind, which is super important for Tom's storyline, because Tom's dream of turning Widow's Bay into a tourist hotspot might actually feed the island even more. More visitors, more desperation, more sacrifices. Richard then asks Tom for one final request. Take him beyond the dead zone at sea, a cursed area feared by fishermen. According to Richard, if he crosses beyond it, the curse will finally end, because he believes he's the last surviving member of the Warren bloodline. Now at sea, the atmosphere becomes absolutely incredible. The closer they get to the dead zone, the more aggressive the island becomes. The radio starts playing creepy distress calls. The water turns violent. The boat shakes constantly. It genuinely feels like the island itself is fighting to keep Richard alive. Then Wick reveals one of the darkest stories in the episode. When he was younger, he and Jerry's brother Mark got attacked at sea by some tentacled creature. And to survive, Wick abandoned Mark, which might explain why Jerry's family never fully trusted him. And honestly, I really hope we eventually see that creature. Because if the island has Lovecraft-style monsters hidden in the ocean, this show just became even crazier. Meanwhile back home, Evan discovers old photos proving his father lied about his mother. Tom claims she died during childbirth, but the photos show Evan alive with her much later, meaning something terrible really happened. Maybe the island took her. Maybe Tom hid the truth. Either way, the mystery around Evan's mother just became one of the biggest storylines moving forward. Back at sea, Richard slowly regains strength after eating and drinking again. And once he realizes death is truly close, he changes his mind. He doesn't want to die anymore. He attacks Tom and Wick violently, trying to survive at all costs. But after an intense struggle, they force Richard back into the coffin. And finally, they cross the dead zone. Tom opens the coffin, and Richard is gone. Nothing left except bones and ashes, meaning the curse should be over. But let's be honest, there's absolutely no way it's that simple. Because the final scene practically screams that the Warren bloodline still exists somewhere. Especially with that mysterious painting showing children escaping by boat. My theory. One of Richard's children survived back in 1702. Probably Francis. Which means the bloodline never truly ended. And if the bloodline survived, then so did the curse. Overall, episodes 6 and 7 honestly felt like one giant horror movie. Episode 6 delivered terrifying gothic horror and emotional tragedy, while episode 7 expanded the mythology into something way bigger and more supernatural. The lore, the atmosphere, the performances, the mystery, everything about these episodes worked for me. And at this point, Widow's Bay might seriously become one of the best horror mystery shows we've gotten in years.